Well, the baseball GM meetings just completed in Las Vegas. Those meetings are kind of the kickoff to the off season, the unofficial kickoff. And two of the top baseball insiders join us today. We're happy to bring on once again SNY's Andy Martino and Mets beat writer for Newsday, as well as SNY Baseball Night New York analyst, and the new vice chair for the New York Baseball Writers Association of America, Laura Albanese. Laura and Andy, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having
John.
me.
Hello, everyone.
Well, it's been a busy week. Lots to unpack. The GM meetings, unofficial start. David Stearns spoke to the press. Andy, you had a one-on-one with David. Laura, of course, you were there with the press conference that he had. And David was he was pretty transparent when discussing a lot of the aspects of what's going on with the Mets during this offseason. And my first thought, and I want to address this to all of you and get your opinions, the Mets go into this offseason with more question marks than answers, I think, at this point. Not only the two big free agents, Alonso and Diaz, but there is that first base question mark. There's a second base question mark, a third base question mark, center field, starting pitching, relief pitching. Alvarez. It's so much.
Put it like that, John.
I mean,
it sounds so easy.
There's got to be an enormous pressure on this guy, as smooth and as confident as he is, and there's got to be an enormous amount of pressure based on how the team finished this year. Would you all agree that this is a pivotal offseason for the New York Mets, and especially David Stearns? He's got his work cut out for him. Andy first, then Laura and TC.
Yeah, I don't think there's any escaping that it's a big offseason for him, John. Obviously, having missed the playoffs last year puts the leadership, Stearns and Mendoza, in a spot where don't let that happen again. And those are the expectations that the team should have for itself, that the owner should have for his top employees. And for the Mets trying to put themselves in the class of the Dodgers and Yankees and the dominant teams in the sport, there should be pressure every year to make the playoffs. And, that's what Stearns signed up for. As I'm talking about this, I remember, Terry, you remember, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it was before 2015 when the expectations on the Mets went up. Those early years for you. There was a story that got out from our colleague John Harper that Fred Wilpon had said, I want the Mets to win 90 games this year. He'd said it in like a private meeting. And at the time, that seemed like, whoa, 90 games. We're not used to the Mets being in that place right now. But it just shows what a different set of expectations they have now, that they're expecting 90. Yeah, you better win close to 100 and make the playoffs. So that's the pressure that Stearns is working under.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, it's kind of compounded because you can only call last year a failure. So not only do you have the failure of last year, but at this point, because there are so many pieces that have come off the books, this is really going to be David Stearns' team. He's not inheriting all that much in terms of set pieces. Sure, obviously your right field is set and your left field is set. But everything other than that, the bullpen construction, he's basically going to have to build this bullpen from scratch. The rotation, after what happened with Frankie Montas, suddenly you're like, because he comes in with this reputation of being able, yes, to build really good teams, but also of being able to find these diamonds in the rough, of maybe finding and looking and identifying talented ways that other front office executives aren't able to do. And I feel like last year there was like a little bit of just kind of like finally questioning some of Stearns' methodology, whether or not this is the right way to construct a team. And so now, not only does he have to reevaluate his philosophy, which he said he was going to do in the offseason, he's got to do something with that reevaluation. And it'll be interesting to see if he actually does change the way that he pursues or which players he pursues.
Yeah, I think that every time you have a payroll that he has, and you have an owner who, is pretty much saying, hey, we're going to win here. And I mean, they showed that changes are going to be made by taking care of all the coaches are gone. So that's the start. And of course, I've never been one to ever blame coaches that I know worked hard to get the job done. So, I would say the pressure next year on David and Carlos is going to be huge. But, David's done a great job of filling in pieces, and they've preached for the last few years about they're raving about their minor league system. Well, guess what? When you put yourself in a situation where you now are expected to win, and now you're going to put all that pressure on young guys, you might be asking yourself for problems. But they wouldn't trade all those bright young prospects for help in the past. So if those are the guys, then those guys better be ready to step up, and that's going to put a ton of pressure on Carlos.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you talk about those young guys. And one thing that kind of surprised me when looking at the press conference that he had was he specifically mentioned Carson Benge and that he would have a chance to make the team when he was asked about center field. So did you find that unusual, that it was kind of like, all right, he's pinpointed this guy. He said, well, Carson is going to have a chance to make the team. Is that unlike a David Stearns comment from the past?
I think that it did strike me, John. I agree that was newsworthy. I think that Stearns' demeanor can obscure the fact that he actually will say things sometimes that are newsworthy. I know that there's GMs out there like Craig Breslow in Boston and Scott Harris in Detroit that speak as if they are like AI generated executives. And Stearns actually speaks English and says things that are headline grabbing. It's just that he says them in a way where we go, oh, this guy must be pretty buttoned up. But so to your point, I actually don't think he is. It's just his projection. But that was newsworthy, but I don't think that seemed out of character for him to throw something like that out there.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway from that was not only Carson Benge as a possibility as your opening day center fielder, but he kind of put it all in a big group. He's like, the young players need to play, and so that's twofold. We've seen him say that before, and certainly there was evidence of that last year. But there's also the other part of that where he said, well, yes, at one point we had the best farm system in baseball this year, and they're still very high up there, and that's good in two ways. One, because you can have a guy like a Carson Benge maybe win a spot, in your starting lineup. And two, because finally you're at a point where you can feel comfortable finally trading prospects. And I feel earlier on when they were still trying to build that farm system, they're more cognizant of the idea, okay, let's hold on to some of these key pieces. But you can't hold on to every key piece. Not every kid that you develop through your minor league system is going to make it to your major league ball club. And now suddenly you have a little bit more trade capital than you might have in the past.
I wanted to touch, before we get to the big ones, Diaz and Alonso. He seemed really non-committal when it came to Jeff McNeil. And I know, TC, you know Jeff really well, and he's been with the organization for an awful long time. But he was asked specifically about the role, and will Jeff see this playing time or at this position? And he didn't really seem he seemed more non-committal to Jeff than I'd ever heard him before. Would you guys agree with that assessment?
I definitely. I think that the only place that I could see McNeil getting a lot of at bats in the Mets next year is probably first base if Alonso's not on the team. Stearns is he values defense up the middle too much, probably, to put McNeil at this phase of his career at an up the middle position anymore. That's my read on what they think. I think it's more likely to see like a Luis Angel Acuna at second base, just real range, even if you're sacrificing bat. That just seems more a Stearns type. I don't think we're going to see much of McNeil at center anymore. That didn't look as good as it. I mean, I give him all the credit in the world for being able to even stand there in Major League center field. I think it's incredible athleticism, actually, that he did it at all. But it didn't grade out as like a plus center fielder, which Stearns wants. So I would say McNeil's probably either traded or sharing first base at bats would be my prediction.
Yeah, I could see him coming off the bench. I could see him traded. It's a little bit complicated now. He went through thoracic outlet surgery, which, yes, he's expected to be ready for opening day, but how much does that affect his trade value? So how much are you going to get back for him? I mean, but I like Jeff McNeil, the player. I have always said this. I do feel like you need a contact back. I do feel like super utility players are really, really valuable. There's always going to be guys that get hurt during the season. There's always going to be, situations where you do need somebody to be able to step into a role. And imagine having that all in one player. I mean, this is your Swiss Army knife guy. Sometimes you'll get on Twitter and people are just like ranting and raving about trading Jeff McNeil. And I'm just like, he is a cheap option that can get on base and play multiple positions. That does have value. And if the Mets don't value that, maybe there is another team that will. But again, the health situation might scare some guys away.
Yeah. I don't know how bad Jeff's surgery was, but, Laura, I agree. But, I go back to what I learned a long time ago. Second base became an offensive position a few years ago. And so all of a sudden now we're talking about defensive. Well, you know what? That's great when you have pretty good pitching. If you have mediocre pitching, you better be really, really good defensively because they're going to put the ball in play that much more. So I've always liked Jeff. He's put the bat on the ball. I like his versatility, what he does. And again, I go back to the teams that won for a number of years that had Ben Zobrist on their team. This guy could come off the bench, play any position on the field, get the job done. And again, was he the best second baseman in the league? No. Was he the best outfielder in the league? No. But what he was a good bat. And that's what for me, that's what Jeff McNeil is. So if you dump a Jeff McNeil, you better turn to somebody who's going to be Brett Beatty. Well, Brett, you're talking about trading the guy who won the batting title one year. Mm-hmm. And you're going to replace him again with another young guy. So I think, again, for me, when it's all about, hey, look, we better get in the playoffs next year, you better have a real good sense of who, those guys that can get the job done at the major league level and have very, very good confidence that that job's going to get done. I mean, everybody talks about, Pete Alonso at first base. Outside the catcher, there's the only other position who handles the ball a lot is first base. So, you talk about, Pete Alonso, what his issues are at first base. Well, you better find somebody who can do that job at first base because they handle the ball as much as anybody, if not more than anybody on the field. So I've always looked at a first baseman as a guy, hey, look, I want somebody there who can play the position. So, and I know one thing about about Pete. Nobody works harder at it. Nobody takes more pride in being better at it than he does. So, and you're going to get that bat away. Well, then you better find somebody who can play Gold Glove, who can also drive in a lot of runs.
Yeah, the Pete issue is certainly front and center. Excuse me for a second. I was just getting a text from John Gibbons.
Hey, Gibby. I was happy to see you landed somewhere, but unhappy to see it was so far away. I'll miss him.
Yeah, we're going to segue right into Gibby. So I know, Laura, I know you have to depart in a little while to catch a flight, but he's going to join us in a little bit. So we're just going to kind of segue, bring him in and have some fun with Gibby, California man, which I never saw coming. But anyway, getting back to Pete, Marsh, if you could prepare that little clip of Scott Boras. I do want to play that, I guess, that pontification that he said. I don't know if Terry, if you saw it or not, but
I saw it.
Oh my goodness! Like first and foremost, there's been reports that these early discussions have been a little bit more friendlier and a little bit more open. So why don't we discuss? Pete, after we take a look at this quote from Scott Boras, because I found this I couldn't even believe I was hearing what I heard from this guy.
Yeah.
So let's play that, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
DHing if he goes back to the Mets, is that something he would consider going?
I think Pete, at this point in his career, he's about winning, no doubt. Had that question a lot. There's no doubt that Pete's pursuers are primed to pay the power piper. Pete picked the perfect period to play preeminently at a primary position. A playoff parched plethora will pounce to participate in the polar plunge.
How do you keep a straight face when you're standing in front of the man?
I don't.
So
I actually don't go to that. This is too annoying. I stayed in my room and watched the footage later. That's my honest
I
answer.
was right. I was right front and center. And he had like a bunch of Top Gun puns for Cody Bellinger. My favorite was courting Zach Gallen. Then we had some Dylan Cease puns in there, and I am trying so hard not to laugh, and people are giggling around me, and I'm just like, no, don't do it.
You
And I
mentioned
Good for you,
Starbucks
Laura.
coffee too for Boston. There was a Starbucks reference that
for
they got.
Bregman, yeah.
I mean, what does
I
he
can
do?
tell
Like,
Terry's really amused by all this. You think
Yeah.
it's hilarious.
Yeah.
but the serious
Yeah.
part is like he's representing Pete Alonso, and when you look at the Mets situation, I mean, where do you find a replacement for that power, for the RBIs, for a guy that posts 162 games a year? I mean, that's difficult. Who's out on the marketplace that you could replace him with?
Mm-hmm.
So when you listen to what Stern says, and of course you listen to what Boras says, and he's going to pontificate. What are all of your gut reactions in regard to, what are the chances that this works out and Pete becomes a lifetime Met or gets a deal longer than the Mets may have initially thought they were willing to give, something past 3 years, for example?
I think he probably helped his case by being opening to DH. In the past, that's not something that Pete had wanted to do, and brought that back to Stearns, and he was like, "Well, I'm really happy to hear Pete say that." So obviously, this is something that Stearns values because, one, the run prevention aspect of it, but also if you are going to give a guy like Pete Alonso a long-term contract, you need somewhere to stash him later on in his career when maybe his body starts to show signs of wear and tear. So I do think that kind of helped in his favor. And then, I mean, there is a reason that Scott Boras kept hammering the idea that Pete is durable. Durability. He plays 162. What does durability mean? Well, maybe that means that this is a guy who you can keep on the field when he's 36 years old. So, I mean, taking those things into consideration. And then, just asking Stearns about it, he did, even though I don't find them to be a particularly sentimental organization, he did say, whether you believe it or not, he does take into account what a player means to the fan base, to the franchise. And if he does do that, then it's harder to find a player that's more New York Mets than Pete Alonso.
I actually, Laura, I do think so. Stearns has this side, and he probably could be more open about showing it. But this is a guy who literally would hide the radio under his covers at home in Manhattan as a kid.
So did I.
Listen to Gary Cohen and Bob Murphy, and there is romanticism about the Mets. There you go with him, and I do think he connects with that part of it. I just also think he sees, well, I'm the steward of this franchise now, and I don't want to get them into anything that I think would be stupid. So I think he's trying to balance those two things, of course. I think he wanted Alonso on the team last year, and I think he wants Alonso on the team this coming year. The question is, do you want him on the team in 2030? Especially, I think the DH thing helps, but his willingness. But at the same time, Juan Soto's on that same path. So how's that going to look in a couple of years? Assuming Soto doesn't use his opt-out coming down in a few years. So there's all kinds of different things to consider. And it's a tricky puzzle. But I to your original question about length, John, maybe I could see the Mets going 4 years. It's pretty tough to see him going longer than that.
Well, I said before the show, John, you and I and Laura were talking, and I will tell you, Scott Boras, in his own mind, got embarrassed last winter with Pete Alonso. He's not going to do that again. Pete went out and had a tremendous year, and Scott Boras is going to get somebody to pay up, and he doesn't care where it's at. Make no mistake about it. He's going to talk to the Mets about longevity. He's going to talk about fans and this and that, but Scott's going to get the money. He's going to get what he wants, and if the Mets, Pete may say, well, I'll take 4 years with the Mets. Well, if that's the case, then they're going to ante up because Scott's going to get what he wants. And I can just, that's why I'm not, and I want Pete back in the worst way. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Mets to get the deal that Scott and Pete want done.
That's a great point, Terry. And I think that all it's going to take is one organization out of nowhere to swoop in with an overpay, what the Mets consider overpay.
Right.
Same thing as last year. Nobody offered Alonso more than 3 years last year. If somebody had, he'd have played for that team. So already, right? So if someone swoops in and does that now, yeah, that could be that. And you never know who it's going to be. You can remember when Jason Wirtz signed with the Nationals. You're like, okay, didn't see that coming. This could be one of those where it's like, oh, the Rockies just gave Alonso 6 years. You never know. That was the thing that was missing last offseason. And I agree with you that the agent and the player are going to be motivated at their last shot at this to maximize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it could come from anywhere too. I mean, look at Boston. There's a little speculation about Boston. That's where Pete's wife is from also.
Yep.
So there's another little personal thing there. And Baltimore, I've heard their name mentioned a little bit. But wherever it goes, I certainly hope that the Mets can bring Pete back. When it comes to Edward Diaz, I think his market is going to be very robust. And he had some comments last night in Vegas at the awards dinner where he was a reliever of the year. And I guess he was asked about his chances of coming back, and he said 50-50.
Yeah.
So when you hear, and that would be a guy that's impossible to replace for the Mets, and you kind of weigh Pete and Edwin, who do you have the priority? But I think both of them are. But for Diaz, I think his market's going to be off the chart this year.
Yeah.
Like you get all of your assessments on Diaz and his chances of returning to the New York Mets.
I mean, the one thing I love about Edwin Diaz is you ask him a question, he just answers it. Like, he's a very nice guy. He's a very genuine person. So we asked him, what are the chances? 50-50. But look, there's absolutely no doubt about it. He said he will simply go to the place where he can get the best deal. It's like, I want the best deal for my family. This is going to be his last chance, really, to get a big chunk of change, most likely, for a longer period of time. And he's going to take advantage of that. I'd gone down to Puerto Rico once to do a story on him and his family and the entire town there. Extremely family oriented, gives a lot back to the community. The money is life-changing, not for him, but the people around him as well. And that's not lost on him. So if the Mets give him the most money, that's where he will go. If somebody else gives him the most money, he's like, I'd be happy to play there too. And I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And I do think, John, we talk about irreplaceable, and I agree and disagree. And I guess the part where I agree with is the ability to succeed in New York and be here and be a Met is something you're gambling with. We saw it with Ryan Helsley in a huge way. You just don't know. On the other hand, as dynamic as Diaz is, and as much as the ballpark experience would miss, Mr. and Mrs. Met playing the trumpets, a Devin Williams or a Kenley Jansen on a one-year deal probably converts most of those save opportunities too, I will say. I could see the saves being easier to replace than Pete's home runs and RBIs, to be honest with you. A lot of people can get saves, even if it's not as exciting.
I'm going to tell you what, I agree absolutely with both of you, what you just said. Listen, he's dynamic, but he's going to get paid too. And so I just we just go back to the playoffs. It's all about bullpen. I mean, you saw what the Dodgers did in the World Series. If you started today, tomorrow you're in the bullpen, and their starters got more innings out of the bullpen, I think, than their relievers did. So. So you've to have that dynamic reliever in that pen is going to be huge. There's going to be a huge market for him.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is like it's not just Diaz, but getting a guy like Diaz helps you kind of put all the other chips in, because look at who they have left in that bullpen. There's so much work that David Stearns has to do in reconstructing this unit that if they are willing to pay Diaz, suddenly his job gets a whole lot easier because you do have that shutdown back end. You're probably going to get AJ Minter in, which is going to be huge, coming back from injury. But other than that, there's a whole bunch of question marks. I mean, between that and then they're going to have to be looking for long relief as well, because finally they learned, the lesson that the traditional long man role is there for a reason, especially when starters are going 4 or 5 innings. So Stearns has a lot of work to do. Signing Edwin Diaz makes the rest of that work a little bit easier.
It certainly does. And then on the starting pitching side, anything can happen. I mean, it's such in a flux when you look about, what they had last year and how everything fell apart on the starting pitching side. And then the young kids who came in at the end with the impressive performances by them, especially Nolan. But he has, once again, and Terry, you're all about pitching as well. I mean, this starting pitching staff There's a lot of question marks there, and who's he to go after? How many frontline guys are going to be available via free agency or even trade? So it's going to be a tough winter for him to piece together the starting staff. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm not even confident. I'm not confident at all that the Tigers are ever going to trade Tariq Skubal.
No.
So that takes one thing off the table, most likely. And then you look at who you have left. You have Framber Valdez, Dylan Cease, Zach Gallen, and Nick Martinez. And then there's kind of like this big drop off. So, there is, when you ask David Stearns about it, he's like, sure, we'd love to have a frontline starter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how many frontline starters are actually available to be had. And that's a real issue.
Yeah, to that point, Freddie Peralta was seen as kind of a alternative to Skubal. And what the Mets and other teams learned this week in Vegas was that the Brewers don't seem to be interested in trading Peralta, which is a little bit of a surprise because they do that with guys like Corbin Burns a year before free agency. But Peralta not available right now. So you're looking at, like Laura said, now you can start to get into 2s and 3s and whatnot. But the Mets need an ace. So
yes,
it's tricky right now to find. They might have to find somebody who we're not necessarily looking at, who they think they can turn into a top of the rotation guy, because those are obvious ones that we tend to talk about on our shows and whatever. Skubal, Skeens, Peralta, not available right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say except you better get pitching. I don't care. You better get pitching.
You're right,
Terry.
And
if you think, if you really think you're going to go out and get somebody's number 3 and he's going to be your ace, you're not getting in the playoffs.
Mm-mm.
If that's going to be if your ace is a number 3 guy, I go back to I was so impressed with the way those kids handle themselves. I'm hoping that McGill comes back and is ready to go again. And because I lived it with those young guys, but look what happened to me. I had all those tremendous arms, and all of a sudden in 2017 they weren't there. And again, it just happens, and that's the dangers about pitching. But you've got to find. I agree. You've got to find an ace somewhere.
Yeah. And if I'm a Mets fan, that's where I'm most worried about. Not because I think David Stearns wants to skimp in this particular market, but just because there just, again, might not be the talent there or available or accessible to create this pitching staff. If guys like Nolan McLean maybe aren't, allow the kid to have a rookie year. He's not going to be perfect every time out. If Sean Manaea doesn't become the Sean Manaea that we knew from 2 years ago, there are so many question marks. That is, I think, probably the biggest concern. I just don't know what is available if things don't work out exactly right.
It's going to be an interesting offseason for sure. Before we end the leadoff here, I did want to touch upon something that really is a major problem right now in baseball. Mm-hmm. And that problem is the gambling scandal that has emerged in baseball right now with the Cleveland Guardians pitchers, Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz, both federally indicted now on conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering charges for their alleged roles in tipping off bettors about specific pitchers in prop bets. This is the tip. This could be a tip of an iceberg. This is a potential disaster for this game. How big of a problem can this become if further measures aren't taken by MLB to distance themselves and to get these prop bets stopped? It just seems to be out of control right now. And I'd like to get everybody's opinion on what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. And the irony was not lost on me that we're doing the general manager meetings in literally Las Vegas in a casino. It's so hard for Major League Baseball to say, that we're so against gambling when they're so deeply embedded in gambling in every aspect of it. You can't go to a ball game without them saying, oh, well, do you take the over and under on how many fly balls there's going to be, like stuff like that. And that is all over every stadium because there's so much money in it. And then you expect it to somehow not sully the sport itself in different ways. I give Scott Boras credit. He was like, prop bets need to end. For 2 reasons. One, because the temptation on these players to maybe do something small that maybe doesn't throw the entire game, but makes them a little extra money in their mind is there. But then there's also the other side of it of just like, well, then every time a guy makes a mistake pitch, and truly just makes a mistake, you have to question and be like, is it because he has money on the game? Because everything's a bet. Absolutely, everything is a bet.
And you can't have those questions. Boras is absolutely right. You can't have those. Once you start to wonder, once the integrity of the competition is in question, there is no competition. I mean, there's no such thing as sports if we're not believing in what we're watching, right? And just these guys are just trying to win, trying to execute the pitch. That's like just essential to its importance. So then it becomes, how do you regulate? MLB took a step this week where they limited those bets on pitches, capped them at $200, and not allow them to be part of a parlay. I don't know. I don't actually know enough about gambling. I just said a lot of words I didn't even know before this came up. I'm not a sports gambler myself.
It sounded good.
Thanks.
I learned what a parlay was last year.
Terry, I learned long ago how to say things that I don't know what I'm talking about with confidence. That's how I've gotten this far. And I just did it again with gambling.
Great
But
job.
I think, on the other hand, it's interesting. I just read something before we came on. Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, who is a Mets board member, wrote an editorial for the New York Times today, and I'm still processing his thought, but he was basically saying, he was involved in this legalizing. When he was governor, he advocated for this. Remember, Jersey was out front of this. And he's saying it's better to have regulation than it is to have just Wild West illegal gambling. I mean, I guess you could make the same argument about drugs, right? Like prohibition versus regulation. And Christie makes the argument that we wouldn't have even found out about what's going on in the NBA or the MLB if not for these things that are in place, because now we can regulate and set rules, and it's not just some bookie that you call. So that's an interesting food for thought too, as we all try to process what's going on here. If it's going to exist, is it better that it be legalized and have rules on it?
Guys, I always look at it. It's like, when this started to get out of control with all of the sports books around. I mean, you own the sports books and ballparks now. Did we really naive enough to think something like this wouldn't happen? I mean, it's I've said this for a long time. I mean, how do we know that 20 years ago somebody didn't offer a player a lot of money to strike out with the bases loaded in the World Series? We don't know. I mean, so now all of a sudden it's out there and it's legal, and now we're throwing our hands up in the air. Well, we set ourselves up for it, and basketball set themselves up for it. And anytime you bet I was the farm director of the Dodgers one time when our AAA team was in Las Vegas, and I was trying to get a new stadium built for our team in Las Vegas. And the mayor of Las Vegas said, "I'm not building a new stadium until we get Major League Baseball." And I said, "You're not ever going to get Major League Baseball in Las Vegas. They cannot possibly let the gamblers be that close to the players." And what's happened now? They're all the sports are in Las Vegas. So yeah, I think it's a mess, and I hope they put all sorts of restrictions on the gambling side, because that really taints the sport itself.
Terry, without being in any way specific, I would ask that. So since I don't know anything about this stuff, the point I was saying that Governor Christie made, and that you kind of just made, like, we don't know if someone just took a dive on something in the World Series and a prop bet for an illegal bookie 30 years ago. Did you ever get the sense in your many decades in the game that things like that could possibly have been going on? Did you ever hear a rumor of, oh, this guy might be involved with some gamblers? Or, I mean, you hear that from like old baseball, right? Like pre Black Sox. But
Andy,
were there rumors around the game?
I never did. I never heard that. But, you would hear something happen on the field, and you'd hear somebody at the bench say, "Oh, he's got it. That had to be on purpose." You just can't make that big a blunder, at the major league level. So, but I never saw it. I never heard about it. So, but I was really sickened to see what happened, because I don't know a lot about the one guy, but Class A's, my God Almighty, why would the money he could possibly make? Why would he do something to make an extra $200,000? That to me doesn't make any sense.
You know what? That makes me think, too, that there's more to this story. That's a great point. There's more to this story than we know, because certainly there have been guys coming from different parts of the world, the situations of which we don't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Why would somebody take that risk? I think I'm not going to offer any theories, but I have some thoughts.
Yeah, my mind went the same way, where I was just like, does not make logical sense. And a lot of times, especially as reporters, when something's like, that does not make logical sense, it means that we have not had enough information yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right, Laura. Well, we certainly appreciate your time, Laura. I know you have a flight to catch.
Back to New York.
So I hope
Cold
Hey,
here.
guys, travel safe. Andy, good to see you. I hope to see you soon.
All right.
Laura, thanks for coming on again today. You guys are the
Thanks
best.
for having me.
And Andy,
How dare you? We say congratulations.
Andy, hang out with us for a bit. And Laura, it's
I'd
great
love
to
to.
see you. And we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.